I would like to bring to the issue of musical analysis and timbre description some insights from an ecological perspective, that is, from an acoustic ecology point of view. That is why I will be talking about soundscape and the repertoire of soundscape compositions, namely musical pieces based on daily life sounds and grounded in what we can call ecological aesthetics, as a starting point for studying and assessing musical structures on the basis of acoustic organization and timbre layout. So for me, soundscape could be perceived and seen as a source for understanding the musicality of timbre, whereas soundscape compositions could be seen as the key for studying timbre differently, that is, as a footprint of musicality perception. So in order for me to convince you why we must analyze the soundscape compositions as a fundamental part of music creative processes, let me start by asking a question that might give us more insight into the complexity of musical composition and soundscape equilibrium. Can we get to know timbre layout and acoustic organization as a musical construct? I would say maybe we should start by asking that same question from a poetic point of view. This is from the perspective of both a composer and a musical performer. With that in mind, I'll be talking about some theoretical guidelines that have permitted me to devise some tools and instruments for scrutinizing the aesthetic and poetic principles ruling the compositional practices in the field of acoustic ecology. More specifically, I will focus on the methodology that was adopted in analyzing a corpus of soundscape compositions that range from a mimetic approach to reconstitute soundscapes through field recordings to various compositional strategies and sound processing methods that enable the composer to undertake very sophisticated musical outlets, including virtual and abstract soundscape composition. This research follows through on the work plan and on the methodology outlined within the framework of my PhD dissertation, Musical Composition and Modeling of Heterophonic Space in Soundscape Compositions. Nonetheless, this presentation will not take into account the creative and compositional part of our disquisition regarding harmonic modeling and musical writing, but instead it will be focused on the analytical means by which we scrutinized our research topic, which permitted us to devise a series of computer tools and instruments for timbre mapping and audio segmentation. In that first phase of our research, we took into account the theoretical principles underlying acoustic ecology. So mainly, we can see soundscape compositions as an ecological system, as Bernie Krause presented. And in that view, we can say that both soundscape and composition based and grounded on soundscape sounds will be seeking balance inside an acoustic field. But also, we can say that soundscape composition is a specific form of electroacoustic musical composition in accordance with those same aesthetics that are grounded in acoustic ecology. In that respect, I would love to say that the soundscape should be seen as a junction between sound art and music, mainly for three reasons. It is a form of sound art in that the space-time isn't seen as the environment or milieu, nor as the container of music itself, but rather as a function likely to be affected by acoustic events and indexes. Or, to quote Hugues Dufour, space-time is seen here as the agogic of moving forces. So it is certainly a fundamental dimension for music production and aesthetic perception. So we can see that sound space derives from this point of view, and therefore we can say that timbre is a multidimensional form bearer. It is also a junction between sound art and music in that it is timbre and not a syntactic external construct that will typify the content of the continuum as a music made of sound events, that will categorize its musicality in a narrative fashion. So according to that same theory, those sounds will categorize the main themes, the core of soundscapes, by distinguishing between what we can call keynote sounds, so fundamental tones, figure sounds or signal sounds. That means figure sounds on a background. And finally, sound marks, which refer to a community sound. But it is clearly a music, considering that those events have denotative and connotative functions, the same way melodies and chords do, inasmuch as the general layout seeks a musical coherence from an ecological point of view. So that leads us to think of listening strategies in order for us to get to comprehend music as a soundscape. So we can say globally that we will be talking about a musical coherence from an ecological point of view. Our proposition is that we have to consider some criteria permitting to characterize the ways of listening from a phenomenological point of view. So we're seeking to tackle their functionality by enlarging the scope of acoustic ecology, mainly by taking into account Barry Trax's acoustic communication model, which integrates the objective approach of acoustics and the subjective approach of soundscape studies, Albert Bregman's auditory stream segregation principle, which permits us to acknowledge the cognitive and psychological mechanisms leading us to distinguish the acoustic events from an acoustic stream in a gestalt matter, a René-Thom morphogenetic process of meaning, which indicates the dynamics of detachment and saliency, and at least the old plus new heuristic that might be drawn from Bregman's work as well as from Delalande listening conduction or conduite d'écoute. So, on that basis, we can ask ourselves, is it possible to grasp sound events' significance or their musical function in the context of musical studies? Let me give you some examples. In that respect, we approached the analysis in a three-way labeling process. First, by annotation and labeling, for characterizing musical contents. So here, as you can see, this derived from the framework of my PhD dissertation. We can find and we can categorize each sound that will emerge and give coherence to a musical construct by just noting the order of appearance. Then we can represent the spectromorphological dynamics that shapes the soundscape's contents, letting us to map its evolution and heterophonic construction. In other words, we can characterize the typomorphological functions. So as you can see here, we can find one sound event that emerges, and then we can say how it will be appearing and reacting throughout time. And ultimately, by defining a structure for the composition, we can compare the results to a computational multi-dimensional representation, looking for concordance between the shapes of the acoustic description and the structure that we have previously inferred. So as I said, those are some results that come out of our PhD dissertation. And on that basis, as we can see here, we could find a really coherent connection between the structure, the musical structure, and the analysis of timbre and of acoustic organization inside. Some examples. Throughout the analysis, we found a high correlation between perceived acoustic events and unidimensional acoustic descriptors. That allowed us to submit a summary table showing inferred musical structure by multidimensional acoustic description, highlighting a significant correlation between compositional strategies and multidimensional acoustic criteria, It follows, therefore, from the poetic point of view, that soundscape compositions correspond directly to at least 3 different sound organizing strategies, each relying upon timbre differentiation and spectral distribution variables. So now I can get to the point where we have to ask that main question. Is it possible to automatically infer musical structures by correlating specific relevant acoustic dimensions during the description process? In order for me to try to answer to that question, I would like to explain some new approaches and new bonds between our research and some new theories of music analysis. After carrying out a series of tests for confirming the results of our methodology, as well as for answering to some of those questions arising from our inquiry, we studied some new approaches for general musical analysis appealing to a disjunctive associative orientation. So Professor Dora Hanninen from the University of Maryland has made it the essence of her work to give a global framework for musical analysis on the basis of segmentation and associative organization. In echo with the works of Christopher Hastie, Benoît Modic, Dave Leduff, and Olivier Lartillot, she proposes 3 analytic domains. The sonic domain, that encompasses the psychoacoustic aspects of music, the structural domain, that indicates active reference to a theory of musical structure and syntax that confers interpretation for musical events, and finally, the contextual domain, which recognizes the workings of repetition, association, and characterization in music. On this basis, we propose a series of computational tools, more specifically some patches on Maximus P, for automated detection of musical structures. We have retained those same 3 aspects as addressed by Hanninen in our general approach for musical analysis. Nevertheless, this new lecture permits us to unveil a solid possibility for multidimensional music analysis. So instead of mapping acoustic criteria individually, as seen here, and as previously indicated, we can think of one big convoluted dimension that will hypothetically optimize detection processes. More specifically, the sonic and structural domains will be represented here in one acoustic multi-layer, which emphasizes the saliency of sonic events by means of correlation functions and threshold scaling. So, with the aim of automatizing the process of musical structure inference, we have developed a series of patches designed to depict the multi-dimensional distribution of the acoustic energy throughout the spectrum, enabling us to calculate the correlation between the most relevant acoustic dimensions operating musical structure perception. So, as you can see here, on the left we have spectral centroid, and on the right one we have spectral kurtosis. When dealing with multi-dimensional audio descriptions, the process of segmentation and data filtering is particularly complex in that each section of the analyzed audio responds unevenly to descriptors. This is because each dimension will structure the flux differently. So for that reason, we have set up a processing module that enables correlation to be treated as one big unitary descriptor that is likely to chop and segment the audio stream by threshold scaling by means of convolution. So here you can see we have both descriptors, and then we have a convoluted third description in order for characterize the music. Here we have another example in which loudness and spectral kurtosis will be convoluted in a metric of correlation, and this will permit us not to map and navigate audio streams differently according to each dimension, as seen here, but rather it will permit us to chop the audio differently in order to find more accurate articulation points. So let me show you a little demo on Max. First, we will take an audio, and we will calculate some descriptions, some audio descriptors. Here we have loudness. And here we have spectral kurtosis. One thing that we should have is a common buffer in order for us to save all that data. And then we can calculate a correlation between both dimensions. On that basis, we can then impose a threshold. As you can see, it's a neat correlation between both variables. And here we can impose a threshold in order for us to chop and segment that audio. So then we can really navigate inside for seeking for finding some articulation points. So on the basis of a set of significant audio descriptors tested and verified by the concordance, as seen, this module will permit us to characterize audio fluxes, and its core is the implementation of a simple correlation matrix. So for example, we have already taken up our analysis process, for instance, on double glazed Camilla Annan 2007, and we have found a very strong correlation between our previous three-way labeling results and those obtained automatically. As you can see here, we have created not only a multi-dimension description, but also a one big buffer that will contain and correlate all those dimensions, in order to chop and find the articulation points. And by doing that, we impose a threshold, and we have found a very strong correlation between those results and the results that we had previously on our dissertation, according to that three-way labeling process. The same case for pendulum, the barrel tracks. So we impose the same criteria, and we find exactly the same results. Therefore, to build upon this new approach, we address some conclusions and new steps. A well-established correlation between significant audio descriptors facilitates the task of proper coherent audio segmentation. So this means that we can really seek for optimization when we operate convolution between different criteria. And this will really permit us to get to the point of musical articulation without having to calculate each time a different dimension of sound. Secondly, a simple correlation matrix can be implemented by convolving a set of descriptors into one main layer, and as seen, it unveils a proper sound organization structure. So this is the core of our proposition for simple correlation between descriptors. Nevertheless, for this operation to be automatized, it is required to implement a complex module of correlation that takes into account the variables of multiple compositional strategies, as noted above. So we have to know that we cannot take simply different dimensions of acoustic description in order for us to get to that point of automatized recognition. So we started on that basis, and the first thing that we were able to manage was a multi-description tool based on a set of descriptors as very general descriptors. And finally, the things that we are planning to do in order for us to take up all that analytic process are going to be accorded to the same logics proposed by Hanninen. So on the sonic and structural domains, we should work on developing a set of correlation-based tools for automatic audio segmentation. Secondly, on the structural domain, it will be suitable to implement a multidimensional description tool that encompasses the full range of perceptual variables that characterize the functioning of structural hearing and stream segregation. And on the contextual domain, a module capable of gathering descriptive annotation and multidimensional acoustic data is to be attained in the future in order to facilitate paradigmatic analysis as a means of obtaining more robust measures of description and correlation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. We are a bit earlier, then we have a lot of time for questions. Claudia?
I
think my question is, I just seen the chat, and same question as Patrick. Would it be possible to listen to some sound examples and see, how you segment, how your correlation of descriptors can segment the music?
Yes, I can try. I wanted to prepare something that wouldn't need an audio presentation, but yeah, of course I can show you some results. So let me open that thing. So I have. So I'm just opening a patch that will take a few seconds. If I found it. Et voilà. So, okay, so now I have to find you again. I lost you, Doc. Okay. Doc. Sorry, I need to change my
oui, rappel pour les participants, pour pouvoir jouer des exemples sonores, il faut se mettre en option mouvement vidéo.
I find that où est-ce que je peux trouver ça? Je trouve plus.
C'est dans le menu Share. So in the sharing button, you have two choices: share for text or share for movement on video.
I found it.
And if you are using Macs, perhaps you have to go to options menu. Yes. Okay, it's on WebEx.
It's on, yes. Okay. So I will. I'm okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here I will just have a little sound I can show you. So as you can see, the main idea of this particular sound is not based on the regular musical criteria, but rather on a morphing of timbre in order for us to find the articulation points or points where the sound will change. So I will operate the same two dimensions, and now I will correlate them here. So right now we only have this how can I say, this description that derives from a simple correlation between two parameters. And now I'm going to chop segments. Okay. Okay. So now I can navigate. As you can see, I can advance, I can go further in order for me to find some points in the audio. So if I repeat, I have to wait. Okay, sorry. Okay. So now, as you can see, I just took one specific point of sound shaping, and now I can say that on that particular point, we found one articulation point by the evolution of timbre. So I can just show you that one. I have to recalculate this. Okay. Okay, sorry, I have to put buffer. Okay, so I hope that was not disappointing. I just took a really small bunch of sound, but on my research, I did the exact same thing on the repertoire of soundscape compositions that I studied in my dissertation, for my dissertation, and the thing that I found, how can I say, interesting is that the same points that we were able to find by a three-way process. So first we have to do the labeling by hand, then we had to calculate each acoustic criteria, and then we could finally find a coherence between the perceived inferred structure and the structure that we imagined as being in accordance with the musical composition. Here we can see that it's optimized by means of just choosing the right criteria and operating a simple correlation. And we, as seen, we can find the articulation points. So I think it's the starting point for proposing a methodology that permits us to infer musical structure without having to follow that three-phase process. And
I have one question. Is it working on very different music? Because in your sound example, you have a very important attack and a modification, an important modification of intensity at the end of the sound. And then it's going on to find some correlation. But in maybe in more traditional soundscape composition with very slow evolution, with noisy sounds, etc. Is it working with this kind of other music?
Mm-hmm. But thanks, it's just the exact same question that I pose myself. That I make because as when I was developing my project earlier, I could identify three three ways, three strategies for composing the soundscape compositions. And on that basis, I can say that we at least we have three different offsets for correlation. So if the composition it's not it doesn't follow the same logic as we have seen earlier, that will mean that we can change the logic of acoustic shaping or sound shaping. So the idea of automatizing these processes is first we just have to identify how can we correlate some of those criteria, and then we can by means of creating also some modules for in order for us to complement the information. I think that the main idea afterwards will be for the tools to choose the right combination of descriptors for each type of music. So that means that when we charge the sound, the computer will previously pre-calculate some criteria, and it could tell us, okay, there's no big changes in RMS, for example, for instance. So then we know that one of the criteria won't be pertinent for the correlation process, but that will be something to achieve in the future. And I would love to say that one big model, one big reference for this this continuing process of research has been the model of BSTD as proposed by Michael Malt. So the idea of correlating different criteria, but not, I thought maybe we can correlate different families of criteria in order to really find some accuracy selon, according to the music that we are trying to analyze.
Thank you. We have time for other questions. Feel free to ask. Yes, hello.
Yes. Hello, Daniel. How are you?
Voilà. Fine, thank you. It's a pleasure seeing you.
It's good to see you, and congrats for your presentation. And I was wondering about the role that machine learning could play in your strategy to build some correlation manually or by listening or by the help of the computerized machine learning.
Yeah, but
in your kind of music, of course, soundscape composition.
Yes, but it's a great question. I don't have I have the idea how that could work, but I have to learn how to integrate all that knowledge of intelligence, artificial intelligence. So when I talked, here. When I talked about the next steps, I think that makes part of the structural domain, because when we talk about perceptual variables that will characterize the functioning of the hearing, of our hearing, of course we will we think of a matrix that will contain lots of data that will also affect the pre-calculating modules for our tools. So of course it's a very, very important phase in the future, but I can say I'm not really allowed now to speak about that, because I don't have a solid base for saying how I am going to do that. But it's on the program. I think it's one of the things that I certainly have to start studying and proposing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions? Claudia?
Yes, I was wondering, how did you come up with first the correlation and then the correlation of these two particular timbre descriptors? Did you try many and that's the one that is most useful, or?
Yeah, kind of. I will just show this. So in the framework of my dissertation, one of the main results was this summary table in which we could organize the repertoire in three global groups. So these groups will just explain which criteria will be coincident with the structural inflections and structuring processes in music. So I took this as a starting point. I reanalyzed some of the pieces, some of the repertoire, and the only variable was trying to find the same exact articulation points and structure by a correlation of the parameters. Because as you can see here, I am looking for, okay, for example, here, when we calculate each one of the criteria and then we operate a segmentation process, we have totally different, not related results. So the idea that a simple idea that I had was, what if I correlate all of those criteria that have showed a really coherent, a real coherence towards hearing processes for segmenting the audio differently. So at the starting point of the PhD dissertation, it was one by one. It was really long. But afterwards, I have a small base that permits me to select. And we can say that a first filtering process has already had place.